The Dallas Mavericks just simply were not on the level of the Celtics, which means that your 2024 NBA champions are indeed the Boston Celtics. Congratulations to all the Celtics fans out there. We will be talking about this title and what it means and what their future may be if they're potentially a future dynasty. But traditionally, pretty much every time after a final series happens, I talk about the loser first. Dallas went a lot further than anyone really expected. They also did it with key parts of the team only being there for the last 30 or so games of the year. This was an extremely impressive run on all counts, but finals appearances are far from guaranteed, and it would be nice to actually win one of these things. So what do the Dallas Mavericks have to accomplish in this offseason to achieve that? Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you are over on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a like on the video, and if you are over on Spotify, which I would prefer, so click that link in the description, give us a like, give us a follow there as well. It's all appreciated. So the first thing to evaluate out of the gate is what exactly are Dallas's issues here? What are the things that they need to address? And for me, I think the two obvious answers are you are going to need a forward of some kind who can do some level of shot creation, ideally, and is a good defender and a very good shooter. I love Derrick Jones Jr., but I think PJ, with his inconsistency from three, he's good enough for it to be worth it at the other stuff on offense, but with Derrick, that's not as much the case. If Derrick's not hitting his threes, then he becomes a liability on offense. I still think you keep Derrick Jones, but I also don't know that he should be your starting three going forward. I think Derrick Jones was as good as he could have been, at least through the first 3 rounds in the context, but as much as I love him, I don't think he's an ideal starting forward for a championship team. So you need to address that, and you need to get somebody who can shoot the ball for real. It's not a matter of, the teams are not going to defend them like, we don't trust you can make this shot. It needs to be, yeah, we think you'll make this shot, so we're going to be right there, and because of that spacing difference, it makes life easier for their guards. And then I also think there needs to be some sort of scoring player, probably off of the bench is the thing that makes the most sense. Someone just needs to be able to generate offense on this team. Like, the only other guy that you had was Jaden Hardy, and he had his moments here or there, not so much in the finals, but in the playoffs. But I don't think his defense is good enough. I don't think his playmaking is good enough, and his scoring is not consistent enough. Now, he is young. Maybe he comes into next year and all of those things are good enough, and now you have that going for you, and that's awesome. But unless we actually see that happen, they need to trade for or sign one of those types of players. Maybe you can bank on that development if you feel really good about Jaden Hardy, but realistically, I'm thinking if you already have 2 all-star, at least 1 superstar level guard, there's just not inherently enough room for him, so it'd be better to have a position of more need. Those are the 2 biggest things in terms of player acquisitions. What do they actually need to do to achieve this, and what assets do they have? Because how much you actually have to give has everything to do with how much you can get. So for the Dallas Mavericks, they have the 2027 first-round pick, which they are allowed to trade. It's pretty much the only first-round pick that they're allowed to trade because they've done a bunch of first-round pick trades and the Stepien rule and all that. But the 2027 pick could be pretty damn valuable. If I'm an NBA team and I'm looking at, Luka's contract length and the fact that, the Mavericks getting to the finals feels like a bit of an anomaly, and maybe this roster peaked here. There's a possibility that's true. As I mentioned, making a finals appearance is not a guaranteed thing. I do not like the logic of, well, this was their first time in the finals, so next time they'll do better. I mean, obviously that was true for the Celtics, and it can be true, but I don't think a franchise should operate as though that's something that's just gonna happen. I think you lose agency that way, and I think you are not as aggressive as you need to be that way, and I definitely think Dallas needs to be aggressive this offseason. So that first-round pick, maybe you put a protection on it, but I guarantee you if you don't, there is going to be a team with a pretty damn excellent role player that is willing to trade that player to you for that draft pick with no protection on it. Because realistically, in 3 years, if that shit ends up being a top 5 pick, that's a good move for them to trade, some sort of starting caliber guy. Also, in terms of assets, I mentioned Jaden Hardy as a young guard. There's also Josh Green, who's a good in theory, 3-and-D player. The 3 was not so abundant in the playoffs this year, but it is at least something that he is shown an ability to do. The other thing that's really positive is they have a lot of tradable salary. Guys that you are okay losing, not because they're not rotational pieces, possibly, but because you can use that money to get better players. The 3 main ones are Maxi Kleber, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Josh. All I wrote was Josh. Oh, Josh Green, that's his name. They make a combined $40 million. So you could package those 3 players. You know, 2 of them are good. Tim Hardaway can be in a regular season rotation at least, so they're also not bad players. So if you're pairing that with a young player, you're pairing that with a pick, you can find yourselves with a pretty goddamn good player. Now, another thing I want to mention, I think they should trade Daniel Gafford. I understand trading for him at this deadline was a big part of the reason why they ended up being good. However, it started off being Daniel Gafford as the main takeaway from their trade deadline, but then PJ Washington slowly but surely became the better and more reliable player. If you look at Daniel Gafford's on-off numbers in the postseason, they're not good. I think the impression of Daniel, how good he is, I think it is... Basically, I'm saying he's overrated. Not by some crazy degree, because who's spending all that much time hyping up Daniel Gafford? But I've said this before, because aesthetically speaking, he makes very loud plays that stand out to you a lot. If you're not paying attention to the finer nuances, Daniel Gafford will look like he's a better player than Derek Lively. But if you do pay attention to those finer nuances, like short roll playmaking, lateral movement, more versatility in general as a defender, that's the shit that actually is making a difference. Daniel on offense was making poor decisions constantly, and on defense, while he can block a shot, he's not a ton of use outside of blocking shots. I also feel that he is one of those dudes who sometimes goes for blocks a little bit too much when he should just stay down and play straight up defense. That's a $12 million contract, and I think Daniel Gafford's value is about as high as it is going to be. When you pair him with the other $40 million, you get to $55 million worth of salary. And you can trade that for a lot of freaking players. $55 million is enough to get you a hefty return from a salary perspective, on top of if you're having Hardy, Gafford, Green, and a first in there. That is not a bad trade package at all. Are you going to get a top-of-the-line NBA player for that? No, but you could get a really, really good player, or like a pair of good players, 3 good players, 3 guys who can actually be in your playoff rotation. With all that said, what are their potential targets? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of options. I'm essentially going to do best case, worst case, something in the middle. I think that's the best way to approach this, because if your worst case still looks all right, then you feel pretty good. So first of all, as you can see in the thumbnail, Paul George is in a Mavericks jersey there. A lot of it's speculation. Who knows how committed to LA Paul is, but he has not signed a contract extension, and he intends on testing free agency. He has been rumored to want to go to a contender, and whether that's the Philadelphia 76ers or the Dallas Mavericks, I mean, the Mavericks just proved that they are a contender by making the finals. He did lose to them in round 1. But they had no expectation, not much expectation of winning after Kawhi got hurt. So I'm going to say people will not treat it like a KD Warriors ass move. It's definitely not to that extreme. But it would have to be a sign and trade. Obviously, you can't just straight up sign him, but I feel like the Clippers would be happy to take back those young guards. The role players like Kleber and Daniel Gafford, they would be... that they could maybe get a better package, but if Paul is wanting to go to Dallas anyways, and if he went somewhere else, they end up getting less anyways, well, you might as well take that deal. Do I even need to explain why Paul George would be great here? He's a remarkable shooter, he's a very good defender, and he is a good shot creator. So the issue of no one else on the team being able to create their shot, besides for Luka and Kyrie when he isn't getting locked up, that is immediately mitigated to a significant degree. Like, you can have Paul George on the floor and Kyrie and Luka are sitting. That's a hell of a luxury. That said, pretty unrealistic. I don't think it's outlandish, but, you know, you shouldn't bank on something like that. The middle options, and these are the ones that I think they should really go for because it's, again, more realistic. Those options that I picked were Andrew Wiggins and Cam Johnson. Golden State is definitely open to moving Wiggins given his underperformance last year. The fact that he played half of the season last year, wasn't great in the playoffs, but his defense is still good and his three ball hasn't fallen off a cliff. He's only at like 36%, which is not great, but it is far from bad. And he, of course, can do some self-creation. I think there is a decent chance that he can check all three boxes really, really well for you. But between the two of them, I would actually be more interested in Cam Johnson. He is a rather large three. He's like 6'8", 6'9", primarily known for how lights out of a shooter he is. Like, no one's leaving him open, and if they are, they're going to pay for it. He's not a bad defender, and he's big. You know, it would be nice if he was a little bit better for the sake of it, but I think the fact that Cam is a bona fide shooter, that he has good size and can play multiple positions, he can also put the ball on the floor a little bit. He's not inept in that area. That's a decent damn forward to have. I think that 2027 first, Hardy and Green, I think that could get the deal done for either of these teams, plus Kleba thrown in there for salary, or Tim Hardaway thrown in there for salary. So from that point of view, I think you can make that deal happen, to be honest. It depends, because Brooklyn's been weird and stingy about certain trades, but I also do think, like, one way you could get in here is, like, if they do lose Nicholas Claxton, well, Daniel Gafford is a pretty damn good replacement, at least ostensibly, so maybe you're giving them their center replacement while they get rid of Cam Johnson. The only concern there is that Cam has had some injury stuff. He hasn't really had any long NBA seasons, I don't think. It's fine, I think. The worst case option I found, it's kind of a tie. It's between Saddiq Bey and Harrison Barnes. I'd probably go with Bey over Barnes, but both have a lot of risks. Harrison is older, but that does also mean he has experience, but he was also pretty awful shooting versus the Warriors in round one, which is his first time in the playoffs on a minute, and he's known for disappearing in the playoffs, even though it was like a 5-year gap of not making it or whatever, or not playing, because I think they made it last year, but he didn't play. Good 3-and-D player, though. Good shot creation. He's not as good at those things as he used to be. He's not anywhere near what he was at his peak, but I do think he is a more than serviceable forward. You know, he's going to hit the open corner three more reliably than Derrick Jones Jr. is, I think. Now, Saddiq Bey is more of a risk because he shot 31% from three last year, which is fucking abysmal. But I don't think he's actually that bad of a shooter. I think this is kind of an anomaly. Sometimes good shooters just have outlier, ludicrous seasons like this. Don't get me wrong, he has been an inconsistent three-point shooter throughout his entire career, but not counting this season, he is a career 36% three-point shooter on very high volume at that. I think he could be an even better shooter than that. Obviously, he is, you know, Trae Young is drawing the attention of the defense and creating plays for him, but I think Luka does that even better. More so because he's just simply a better player, and he'd benefit from having that on the floor. I would go with Bey also because he is younger, and also because I think there's a little bit more willingness to move on there. I don't think Sacramento really wants to keep Harrison Barnes around like that desperately, but I also think there's a very real chance that the Atlanta Hawks blow it up this offseason, and therefore Saddiq Bey is one of the players that you can easily pick up in the middle of that blowout. There was one other name that I also thought of that is even more of a gamble because we haven't really seen proof that this guy can be like a good playoff player. I mean, technically, he averaged 20 points per game. If not 20 points per game, he at least had 20 in his last two games versus the Bucks 2 years ago. I'm talking about Patrick Williams. Sorry, I should clue you in. But that was also because the defense was like, if Patrick Williams beats us, oh well. And he didn't. That said, he's shot 40% from three last year. He's pretty consistently been a good three-point shooter, but the volume is low enough that it scares me, and his mechanics are awkward enough that it kind of scares me. They're not bad mechanics by any stretch, but they are very mechanical, if you know what I mean. It's not a smooth jump shot. It's like, yeah, this guy learned how to shoot. It was not intuitive. And I really feel like that can be the difference between guys who are legit shooters and guys who are like Al-Farouq Aminu and shoot 40% from three on the season, but then are getting left wide open in the playoffs and bricking it. That is my fear with Patrick. And also, you know, there's a decent chance he will cost too much because some other team wants to take a flyer on him as a young talent. I don't know how high the Bulls are willing to go to match whatever contract offer he gets as well. So restricted free agency is tricky. I wouldn't go that route, but it is a name to, like, I don't know, put on a whiteboard. So for the backup shot creator on the high end, I think you get Malik Monk in a sign and trade. And there is, again, rumors of Malik Monk not wanting to stay in Sacramento, although there's a decent chance he ends up starting going into next year because Kevin Huerter is just not what he's supposed to be. I think that Sacramento wants to remain a playoff team from there, so they would happily take on some older role players. And then, again, a draft pick, one of those young guys. I think Josh Green makes more sense than Jaden Hardy. Or the other high-end option is Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Atlanta Hawks. Again, I think the Hawks are about to blow it up, so you could swoop in and get one of the best backup players or bench players in the entire league for very cheap. Between the two, I would prefer Bogdanovic purely because he is more of a playmaker than Monk is. Monk is a higher volume shooter, where I think Bogdanovic is just slightly more reserved. And I think that being reserved is probably preferable. He is one of the best bench pieces in the league, period. And I think normally on other teams it'd be hard to get him, but Atlanta, they have reason to give him away. Maybe you even combine him and Sadiq Bey into one trade if that's the way you want to go. I guess this is middle case, but also I'm such a hater of this player that I don't even know if I could call it that. But realistically, D'Angelo Russell is indeed a shot creator and a good three-point shooter and a good playmaker. So that's the route you could go. Worst case, I would say you go with Alec Burks, who was actually pretty great for the Knicks in the playoffs. I think he had back-to-back 20-point games or, in that ballpark. So, that's a pretty good worst case scenario. Either way, I do think you need that creation present, but I think if you get any combination of those players, you do feel better about your chances in this series if you had them to begin with, But I do think you need to land on the higher end of those deals to actually conceivably win a series like this. So from here, that's in terms of what they can accomplish with moves. I think something that NBA fans often leave out is you can change up game plans, you can change up rotations. Some players will get better, some players will get worse throughout the offseason. So in terms of internal improvement, I think the fundamental decision that has to be made to guarantee Luka Doncic stays in Dallas is you make him more of an off-ball player, like by a wide margin. Michael Jordan in 1992 had the 44th highest usage percentage in the history of the NBA. 44. Everyone above him, from 43 up, didn't win a championship in that season. Usage can be too high. Luka does too much. And I think there is a combination in mentality from Luka that needs to change. But more importantly, the team has been catered to this aspect of his game. Kyrie is a very off-ball player, as good as his handle is. Like 60% of his threes are assisted. So he's a catch-and-shoot guy in the offense all the time. I remember there being stupid fucking discourse at the start of the year about how Luka was shutting out Kyrie and he was making him worse because Kyrie had a bad start. But they're like, Kyrie isn't dribbling the ball all the time. He's taking the ball out of his hands. Man, Kyrie was never dribbling the ball all the time. He played alongside LeBron James, for God's sakes. That said, I think Kyrie should do it more. And I think the other players that you put around Luka should be more capable of passing and dribbling and shot creating themselves. That is easier said than done, but you just can't have everything fall onto Luka's shoulders because A, he gets hurt and that's not going to help you, and B, he backpacks for 3 quarters. He's played 30 minutes plus already in the case of the finals while dealing with injury, and then he's fucking tired as hell, and on top of that, his teammates are not in good position. They are not ready, or not in good position, not in good rhythm rather, because they haven't really been that involved in the offense. They're not touching the ball with regularity. It's just not ideal. Now, I've realized a lot of people just use that to default criticize Luka. I don't think that's fair. I think his skill set, he took heliocentrism about as far as it absolutely could, but I do not think this works. Luka this year, 20th all time in usage percentage. He has, I believe, 4 or 5. I think every year besides for his rookie year is in the top 25, or it might even be top 20. So that's no bueno. So you need to make him more of an off-ball player. You need to have Kyrie doing more of the ball handling, and in general, you need more of the shot creation to come from other players. Now, if you're not going to do trades and you want to do internal improvement from Jaden Hardy as an option, that's cool, but I think you're going to have to trade for it. I should have organized this differently, but then I'm getting right back into free agency suggestions. But, you know, you do have to fill out the rest of the roster after making these deals. And if you're going to end up trading Daniel Gafford, you're going to need a backup 5. The names that I got there for dudes who should be basically minimum or near minimum contracts is Richaun Holmes, Mason Plumlee, Thomas Bryant, or if you wanted to take the risk, you can get a roided up Tristan Thompson. I'd also, from there, just essentially sign as many cheap wings / shooters as you can. Maybe invest a 2-way contract into like some young shot creator who's like not that good, but maybe he turns it around. You know, have just the other Jaden Hardy type player on the team, hopefully, that you could find as a diamond in the rough. Wing shooters, I'd go guys like Gary Harris, Justin Holiday, Joe Ingles, Robert Covington. Royce O'Neal is on the higher end of that. I don't know if you can really do that. It's probably too expensive. And if you wanted some more creation period, I do think you might be able to get Monte Morris for a fairly cheap price. With all those ideas out, let me go ahead and put together the versions of this team. So I'm going to do the best, and then let's just go with the middle scenario, because worst case is no fun. I don't want to think about that. And frankly, I don't think Dallas would survive the worst case scenario where they get the worst option at 3, and the worst option is the backup guard, and the worst option of role players. But, you know, this is how they could theoretically make this happen. In the best case scenario, let's say you trade Maxi Kleber and Josh Green for Malik Monk in a sign-and trade. And then we'll say you trade Gafford and either Jaden Hardy or a first-round pick, and that lands you Cam Johnson from the Brooklyn Nets. So from there, you have a lineup of Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, Cam Thomas, PJ Washington, and Derek Lively, with Malik Monk, Derek Jones Jr., and let's say Richaun Holmes, Justin Holiday, and Joe Ingles off of the bench. And your best case scenario, of course, the borderline unrealistic one here, is that, fuck it, Paul George, you are a Dallas Maverick. And we're also getting Bogdan Bogdanovic from Atlanta in exchange for Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, and that first-round pick. That might be a little bit steep. Maybe you go one of those young guys in the pick. From there, it is Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, Paul George, PJ Washington, Derek Lively. And off of the bench, you are getting Bogdan Bogdanovic, Derek Jones Jr., and we'll say Mason Plumlee and Gary Harris. Is this team making it back to the finals? I think so. I think there is a very real shot that that would still be the best team in the Western Conference, but I also think there's an argument to be made that the Mavericks were the 3rd best team in the conference, and just due to matchup circumstances, they ended up making the finals. But I think this can make you a confidently top dog team in the league throughout the year and going into the playoffs. That's another thing worth mentioning is I said in the intro, 30 games of PJ and Gafford, key parts of their rotation. They also started Derek Jones around that same time, and that was a new thing that they had to get used to. So they didn't have a lot of time to actually build chemistry as a team, build continuity as a team, really get all those things ingrained in your muscle memory and your brain. So having all of that, an off-season, a training camp, that'll help a lot. If you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, you should feel optimistic about your future, but with a degree of hesitance. Because, you know, just because you made the finals doesn't mean you're out of the woods in terms of Luka Doncic not really wanting to be there. The Cavs made the finals in 2007. LeBron still left. People are making that comparison a lot. Same thing I always advise the Mavericks front office when it comes to Luka. Don't waste time. Do not be stagnant. Go for it. Okay, I real quick want to give some credit to the Boston Celtics and their championship. I am going to probably expand upon this a little bit deeper in a future video, but as you can tell, when this is coming out, this is pre-recorded, so I don't actually know who the finals MVP is. It's leaning Jaylen Brown right now, but I do think it is possible that if Jason has a great game 4, if the series is extended, that can change. But right now it's looking like Brown. I'll probably get into the weeds of the discourse about those two. And, there's a constant talk about their relationship that's happening right now. Is Tatum jealous of Jaylen Brown's finals MVP? Is this going to become a much worse talent-wise Kobe and Shaq type of thing? I don't know. I think that's a little overdramatic, and I trust that Tatum and Brown just want to win the title and actually don't care that much. Because I think if they did, they would have shown it by now, and it wouldn't just be pure speculation from people. I do want to quickly knock out a few I was wrongs here. I did pick Boston to win this championship going in to this series, but I picked them to lose in the finals to the Nuggets. Now, if you told me that they met the Mavericks in the finals, then I would have said they win, as I did when we got there, but still, not good. Didn't get that right. And going into the season, I had Boston as the third best team in the NBA and the third most likely to win a title. While I was a big believer in the Dame and Giannis Bucks, I still am to a degree. I think you can do a lot of restructuring with that roster and get a couple of good role players on your hands, and suddenly you've got a very serious threat to Boston. But it didn't happen this year. Denver didn't even make it to the fucking finals. So clearly, Boston ended up proving to be the better team. I was wrong about Jaylen Brown, as a lot of people are pointing out. A lot of people hated on that contract that he signed, and I did too. I've also hated on him as a player in general. I don't even know. I think if I had him in the most recent top 50 I did, he was probably in the 40s, no higher than 35. That said, the biggest gripes I've had with Jaylen are things that he changed. And I think it's worth considering in discourse how time changes things, but that doesn't mean the reaction at the time is inherently some stupid overreaction, right? Because Jaylen Brown was bad at dribbling, and he was bad at making good passes, and he was he wasn't great at playing off-ball defense. And because of that, I thought he was overrated because those things were often ignored. Look, the guy can score in an isolation, get a nice dunk, and play some very impressive visually one-on-one defense, but in terms of the little things, the same argument I made with Derek Lively, he's kind of bad at those things. He's not anymore, though. So, this version of Jaylen Brown, I have very little criticism for. Really none whatsoever, especially after this final series. So, yeah, this version of Jaylen Brown, I didn't necessarily think he'd get here easily, but I also wasn't like, he's not going to get here. Like, there's a difference between having a problem with a player at the time and not thinking they could ever improve versus actually thinking that they could improve. Now, the possibility for him to improve made it worth that contract in hindsight, so I was wrong about that. The KP trade, I said that it was a good deal, but I didn't like the vibe of it, didn't like the feel of it, and I was afraid losing Marcus Smart would be bad. I've actually completely heel-turned on my opinion on Marcus Smart, so that's not a problem to me anymore. And the fact that they got Porzingis and 2 first-round picks, this is a hell of a fleece. The Derek White trade was a hell of a fleece, and of course the Drew Holiday trade was a hell of a fleece. This was the title that Brad Stevens put together. Not to take credit away from the players, because at the end of the day, the players have to go and play the game, but he couldn't have done a better job in the GM chair. I was also afraid that the inconsistency might show up. It did not, really at all. The only times that it did, there were some moments where they did blow a pretty big lead at first in Game 3 going into the fourth quarter, and it was like, oh shit, y'all were up like 30. Are you going to blow this? They didn't, though. I was afraid they wouldn't execute in the clutch. They executed way better in the clutch than the Mavericks did. Didn't factor in the thought that Luka would have to carry to this degree, and that's the reason why Dallas sucked in fourth quarters, but at the end of the day, they were the way better clutch team, and my take going in was I think the Celtics will win because they're more talented, but if they play down to that competition a little bit and allow them to hang in there till late, I think they'll probably succumb to that pressure and fold and not execute properly. That didn't happen. Like I said, I thought Boston was going to win this thing, but it was not. I didn't think it was going to be handedly. I think I said with a healthy Porzingis 6 games, with him kind of in and out 7, and if he's straight up out, then you're going to have to say I said Mavericks in 7. Even with Porzingis missing time, that they are possibly getting a sweep, and if this comes out on Friday night, that means they got a sweep. So the question I want to ask earlier, this is interesting to me. The last 6 championships have been from a different team every time. It's interesting to me that we're kind of leaving a dynasty era in the NBA, but I'm looking at this Celtics team, and I can almost feel like the tides are shifting back with them. And I don't see any reason why they can't be back and potentially be a perennial finals team, a team that could win multiple championships in a decent span of years. I don't think there's any reason that they can't be back. Everybody that's under contract, other than Al Horford, is pretty damn young. I think the oldest players who are prominent rotation guys are like 30 tops. So congrats on... Oh, also, I need to give a congratulations to Al Horford and credit to him, because if you go ahead and look up the record after he's officially won this ring, most playoff games played by a player in the NBA without winning a title, it was Al Horford in between Karl Malone and John Stockton. And as a major hater of both of those two players, thank you, Al Horford, for finally winning so that those two sit alone at the top of the record for most games played just to not win a fucking title. Congrats to Boston Celtics fans on winning the 2nd championship you've had since the 1980s. Maybe a low blow, maybe kind of petty, but you know what? I don't like Boston, so I had to let it out at the end there. But they did win the championship handedly, and they deserve credit for it. Doesn't necessarily mean I have to be happy about it. But yeah, that is it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video, and goodbye.